Okay. Looks like everything is working correctly. Okay, so welcome. What I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to start working on setting up a new swatch book that's going to be loose leaf pages that's going to go into a second A5 plotter. If you haven't seen my recent video, I did just get a plotter A5 and I really liked it, but I found out very quickly that I had more things in it than what I wanted to use it for. So I ended up getting a second plotter to use for this original use case because the first one is being used for other things as well. So, and just make sure my audio is working here. Yep, there we go. Okay, so just to kind of do a walkthrough of exactly what I have here, and I'm trying to get my screens where I can see if there's any chat messages or anything that come up, so bear with me one moment here. Just get this moved to the other monitor, and there, we should be good. So in this second plotter, and this is the A5 horsehair that has the black, and let me switch camera views here. I think I can show it a little bit better with this other camera. So this is the black, or the green, and I really love the color. It looks a little even better in person. The camera kind of dulls it out. It's got a really good texture and look. So this is the A5, and it has the kind of matte black bar on the back. And what I've done is I got a basic band to hold it closed. And then in here I got these project manager packs, and each one of these is going to be a different type of paper. So this one is currently the Yamamoto paper testing packs. I've punched all the pages from the previous videos that I've done on these, so I have them as a reference. And then each one of these is a different type of paper. So this is Tomoe River 52. This one's Iroful 75 loose leaf. This one's the Yu-Sari loose leaf. This one is Life Bank paper that was on a top-bound tablet that I ripped off and punched. And then these are the Yamamoto A5 testing packs, the two that I did initially. And I'm probably going to go back and add the extra pins on here that have kind of become my standard testing. And then in the back, because I added a couple other papers, let's see where they go here. I have just some of the actual plotter paper, because as I always say, it's good to test on what you're going to be using to write. And then also, this is Nemesine with the Clyde grid. So, yeah, the Christy, the horse hair one does look great. The black one looks okay, but the texture on the green, it really pops. I mean, it just, as soon as I got this, I sent a picture to Olive Octopus and said, I know you're not the biggest leather person, but this is in your wheelhouse of colors. But I love the look. And I think with this layout, I've got plenty of room for expanding in terms of paper, adding in there, because I have extra sheets now, and as I make it into a swatch book, that will be good for this. So let me set this aside, and then here are all of the different papers. So I'm going to be doing these Iroshizuku inks today, and I apologize that overhead camera is washing this out a little bit. Hopefully it shows the colors better once I actually start putting the ink down. But I've written in pencil on the bottom corner of all of these. Of course, I pick up the one sheet of plotter that I didn't write it on because it says plotter. I've written what the paper is, so I'll be able to tell and get it put in the proper folder. And this will also let me hold up pages side by side to do quick comparisons and things like that. And then what I'm doing to make sure that I try and keep these as even as possible is this is actually one of the undated calendar pages from the Laconic that I just released the video on. And I drew in the grid so I can put it underneath and try and keep a similar grid pattern of sizing. Something just fell off my camera. That's interesting. Keep it grid sizing for all of these to try and standardize this as much as possible. So for swatching, what I'm going to be using is one of the glass swatch rods that you've seen on here before, and then I'll write the name of the ink with just my dip pen. I've got a handful of these, so hopefully I can get through most of the inks without having to clean in between them, and I'll just have to dip my glass dip to write the ink name as I go. So let me get started here, and I'm going to start. The way I have my camera set up is I'm going to try and, since I'm going to have one swatching, I'm going to do one, kind of set it aside, and I'll probably, as I switch over to this camera view, so the ones that are kind of drying as I do the next one can be here. And I have all the Iroshizuku bottles lined up. I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 17 different Iroshizukus. So I don't have the full collection yet, but I'm working up to it. So to get started, and keeping all these papers where they have room to dry, and it's going to be probably the challenge of trying to show what I can on the cameras with desk space and whatnot, but we'll make it work. So I'm going to start, and I was in a little bit of a debate. Do I want to try and do color families, or am I going to keep these mostly by brand? In the end, I don't think it matters so much because each page is going to have the same order. So I'm just going to do mostly of, Iroshizuku are blue heavy, and I have more blues and greens than anything else. So I'm going to start with those and then work my way down. So the first ink is going to be the Shinkai. And some of the notable inks that I do not have, man, this one I really tightened before. In here, I don't own Yamabudo yet for some reason. Hello, Chris. Good to see you here. So Yamabudo is probably the next Iroshizuku that I'll pick up, and I'm going to doing a road trip this weekend with a couple of the Middle Tennessee Pen Club folks, and we're going to Little Rock for their Pen Club meeting. So I'm going to be at Vaness, and if I was going to pick up more ink, that's kind of the place to do it. So there's a good chance I'll be coming home with maybe Yamabudo, maybe who knows what else. By the time the weekend is done, possibly a Leonardo pen that I've had my eye on, since I'd be able to look at it in person and make sure I get a pattern that I'd like. So if you haven't seen this kind of swatching technique before, just doing the little bit of this square, and this is where I'm going to have to, I guess, do the squares and then come back and write for all of them for a consistency standpoint. Yeah, Yamabudo is one of those that I don't know how I don't own it yet. It's intriguing. It's not a color I would normally use, but it's so popular that I would be foolish to not try and give it a try. So that's kind of my view on that one. Is I feel like I should own it. One, I like Iroshizuku Inks, and two, it's kind of one of their, the fan favorites, so to speak. So I feel like I need to get that regardless. Now, if I can get it in one of these small bottles, I probably would do a small bottle to try, because then I can always get a bigger bottle after the fact. But, I'm trying to expand into more colors. I used to just be, more blues and blacks and whatnot, but as I've kind of got back into the hobby again, it's kind of nice writing in colors. Like, one of the inks I've been going to lately is the Arkansas Pen Show Fresh as a Daisy, which is like a lime green, and I really love that. And that is not something that when I first was in pens years ago, probably anybody would have guessed as a color I would have been using. And I'll be really interested, and a lot of this comes from seeing and doing the interview with Lisa Olive Octopus, of how she kind of got into her swatching stuff and seeing where she's able to do these side-by-side comparisons. I love that, and that's stealing the idea, a little bit different execution, but having where she's able to pull out different sheets of paper and show multiple inks side by side and show how it writes differently or shows up differently on different papers. That's just too good of an idea to not steal a little bit to use for my own. So give credit where it's due, but then also, you know, I think there's so many people who swatch in different ways. There's a lot of crossover, and I don't think there's really gatekeeping and swatching of any sort, because we're all going to utilize them in a different way. Okay, so drop that over in the water. So far, all of these are drying. The paper I'm really interested in here to see how it behaves and what it does is the Iroful, because Iroful is known to show colors differently. Shinkai. And I guess I should probably put the square underneath, but I think I've left enough room to write these without creating too much of a not like to like comparison. See, and speak of the devil, and Lisa is here, Olive Octopus. Yeah, I was just talking about how I stole your, I was intrigued and liked how you did your swatches, and I'm making my own version. And that when I got my A5 with the green horsehair, I had to send you a picture, because it's right in your wheelhouse of colors. And I figured Iroshizuku was a good setup to start with. I know I'm going to be adding more inks, because that's one thing in my YouTube channel I really haven't done much is ink stuff. And that's a huge part of the stationery and pen hobby. And I don't ever want to become a ink person per se, but I want to use more inks. So it's natural to have different inks in use on the channel, but I don't think I'm ever going to become or have any desire to become more of an ink channel than a pen and general stationery type stuff. Okay, so we've got the Shinkai. And I'm thinking Tsukio is probably the next color of mine that should go in terms of... I was thinking Tsukio and then Rika, and then Amairo, and then Suigyoku to kind of round out the blues that I have. I guess Sayuro is more of a blue. Well, it's a blue. We'll do Tsukio and then Sayuro maybe. Okay, so this is going to be where the challenge comes in of not smearing any of these as they dry, so I can put them over the template page. So get creative here. No, glad for you to watch, and this, with the nice thing with YouTube is this will show up after the fact on demand, so if there's parts you want to go back and see, it'll be available for that. I got all this planned and set up at the end of the day as I was wrapping up work, so I had everything kind of staged and scheduled it so I could start right after. Okay, so Tsukio, and this is a newer Iroshizuku. This is one that, like Yamabudo, I'm surprised I didn't have it earlier, but it's one I did add maybe a month ago when I was down at Butler. He had just gotten in a new order, and I decided some of that needed to come home, and it was right after I got my titanium Monteverde. And that's actually, it's inked in that pen currently. And I'm already liking this plotter paper, which I was really surprised at how well it works. And I know this camera's kind of washed out, but it's almost getting sheen and chroma shading. It's showing the sheen really well, better than I would have thought. And even this Nemesine is showing the sheen pretty well from the Shinkai as it's drying, so that's nice to see. Get this lined up here. And this is going to be a longer process to get all the inks. I have nowhere near the ink collections of some others, but I'm at 126 or something like that. So I've got a baby ink collection, but it'll still take some time here to kind of work through these. In my 92 right now, Chris, I have Sailor Tea Time, which is this kind of off orange, which I got at Goods for the Study in New York around Thanksgiving. And because it's the clear, it just has a cool look. And that was, I was just kind of getting back into the pen side of things. I'd been not as active in writing or pens for a while. And that was one of my first more colorful inks that I went into, but I'm always going to be a sucker for blues or teals or whatnot. I think that's just part of the nature. So, Christy, was it a guy named Nick? Short hair, because in our local pen club, Nick, who's a plotter guy who kind of helped me decide what I did and didn't need, had a plotter A5 that is his swatch book. And at Pen Club this last Saturday, I was looking at that, not realizing that that was going to be this end goal. I had already ordered the second plotter, knowing that I was going to need more space. But I believe he was at Atlanta and had the plotter swatch book. Okay. So, try and get some of this off there. I have a feeling that the plotter, because of the ring-bound system, it's probably used quite a bit for swatches because the flexibility of moving things around. When I first got into pens, I didn't really even swatch inks. I just kind of had them and used them. And as my wife got into pens, she is more color indecisive, so she's always wanting to look at the swatches before she inks a pen up, where a lot of my pens, they've had the same ink in them for a decade. I always use the same thing, so as I'm experimenting more, this is a nice reference. And then being more active in a pen club, and of course with the YouTube channel, having reference that I can do that's more than just the color decks or color ring is nice, because the color ring or the color decks is not going to be traveling with me anywhere. And this is the Iroful, and I could tell automatically. Oh, Nick wasn't in Atlanta? Okay. I thought he might have been. Yeah, the Iroful's already showing the sheen and the colors different, so that is an expected outcome in terms of that. And thanks everybody for kind of joining in on this. It's nice to see names I'm familiar with and people who kind of know each other through different Discords and things like that. It's nice to have recognizable names. Okay. So swap these. And I'm glad I was looking up, and I think it was Anna who either sells or used to sell a template board that goes underneath pages so you can do swatches like this. And while I looked at this earlier today, so obviously I didn't have time to order it, I'm glad I happened to come across her post about that, because that is going to make this much easier to keep in some semblance of order, so I'm not all over the place. That's why I like dot grid or lined paper, because if I naturally write on blank paper, it's all going downhill. I don't know if anybody else is like that, but if I try and write on blank paper, it's going to start going down and to the right in short order. And speaking of Anna, the Joe from Gentleman Stationer, he releases tomorrow, and then Anna will actually be next week. I'm recording with her on Monday, and her episode will release next Thursday. And then the week after that is going to be Lisa Marie of Poorly Controlled. We just got that scheduled yesterday, so just a little bonus of what's to come in terms of the interviews. Okay, so that's Tsukio. So on to Rika. I don't know. Rika or Sairo? Let's do Sairo. Okay. So get this lined up. And that is one little quirk of doing these punched pages. The Nemesine, I love that they're perforated, but they are about a centimeter more narrow when you rip it out. So it's A5, including the part that goes into the rings. So I am having to shift this a little bit to make it work. Okay. Yeah, I figured this was close enough to have some semblance of, because I thought about doing it like when I made a watercolor test thing where you get like the washi and you line it on the paper and you make them all perfect. And then I was like, well, they're not all going to be an exact match, so that's probably more effort than the benefit at the end. So that idea quickly got scrapped once I realized I could just draw some lines on this existing sheet of laconic paper, and this seems to be working pretty well. So now that I know that they exist, though, next time I order something from Well Appointed, I'll probably go in and order a set of the templates Anna has, because there's a couple other formats that could also be useful for this style of book and swatching. Man, I haven't used this Yu-Sari paper all that much, but I really like how it shows that sheen on the Shinkai. And I'll pause here in a second and show that, because it's different than I would have expected. As when I come back through and write the name on it, I'll hold that up to the side camera that has a little bit better color. I tried to adjust my exposure settings on this overhead camera, and I don't want to risk knocking it over or anything during the stream. But obviously I washed out the image more than I realized when I put white paper down on the desk. Okay, so that's all of those. Okay, I need to dip pen next, not make sure that's... I really feel like I need a second dip pen for doing something like this because I'm afraid I'm going to cross-contaminate colors. Wouldn't be the end of the world, but... Yeah, and it's not lining up perfectly, Lisa. It's more of like when we did the thing in Arkansas and you're able to hold the papers up on camera side by side and show, pretty close. That's what I'm going for. I'm going for loosely lined up, not perfect. Just so you can get the side by side holding up comparison works well. And using those little project manager folders that I showed at the beginning of the stream to keep these separated by papers, that way I'll have, this is swatches on this paper, and then I can take them out and hold them side by side if needed. But these will normally just be in the little divider by themselves, so it's, someone can take that, I can take out that little project manager folder and hand it to somebody, and then they can look through those swatches on that paper. And I don't know, and maybe one of you do, I'll grab the package here in a second. This Tomoe 52, it didn't say Sanzen on the packaging. Let me see, where's that? This is a 2023 renewed at the bottom, and it's this Tomoe package. Man, that is really washed out. I apologize. Let me try switching over to... Oh, well, that's not going to do it. Let me try this. So this package of Tomoe is the one that I'm using. So I don't believe it's Sanzen, but you know what? The Tomoe is not Tomoe anymore, so it's hard to know what's what. I did see that, Lisa. That is a good call out. It is, if you're not aware, it's Anna's birthday, so on Well Appointed Desk, she has a coupon code for 20% off everything, I think, today, except for her de-stash items. And I'm actually going to try a trick I set up to see if it actually works. See if that actually pops up on the screen. Okay, one more here. Okay, and that's the writing on all of them. So the one I was going to show, if this other camera... One of the cameras I'm using is my phone, and it disconnected from OBS. If you do any kind of streaming, and you know what that means, it can be finicky. And it has not reconnected. So let me just try and show it on the overhead, and hopefully it's not too washed out. So the which one was it? The plotter paper. Oh. So the plotter paper is kind of surprising at how, man, that's blurry. Not ideal. Of how it's showing the sheen and whatnot. That's a surprise to me. You know, that's not some. I think Plotter uses Midori paper in it, but that's just interesting to see that it actually shows sheen and color pretty well. Okay, so continuing on, next for the last one of the top row is going to be the Rika, which is one of the new inks, but I think at least every name I recognize on here probably knows that it's one of the new ones, but in case someone's watching later who I do not know or who's new, it's one of the newer Iroshizuku inks that just came out towards the end of last year. It's a cool blue, I think, is the description that they use for it. And I've written an Opus 88 demo dry of this already, so I definitely like it as a color. And Lisa, if you're still here, did you do anything after your inks dried to prevent the papers from curling up? Because I can already feel most of these are going to want to curl as they dry. That's something I didn't plan on in advance. I'm sure after a little bit of time, like in the notebook, it'll settle down, but just so they don't completely warp around if possible. And my hope was originally to not get fingerprints on this paper, but being able to hold it down because of that curling up, you know, there might be some of these later swatches that will test the fingerprint resistance ability of the papers as well. Well, not ideal. It's the reality of using pens and inks and paper, so let's consider it extra thorough testing. Okay, that's what I was kind of thinking, so good to know. You know, we'll see how these end up by Arkansas this weekend. And I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a fun trip. Some of the Middle Tennessee folks heading to Little Rock to visit Vanessa, because that's where the pen club meeting happens to be. Going to have TriStar Studios pens, Nick Pasquale, so Pens by Pasquale. Sean Newton will be there. Oh, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Let's see how to pop that up here. I think you're my first ever super chat, so that is definitely appreciated. And have a good night, a good trip home. Okay, so that's on all of them. Yeah, but as I was saying with Arkansas, that'll be fun. You know, seeing how a different pen club functions. It's a little bit more mature. We have a great local pen club, but Arkansas is matured to a level where they run the pen show and things like that. So just to kind of see how that is, because I think our club we just recently did a Discord, thanks to Olive Octopus helping coordinate that, and just the club is in a good position for growth. There's a lot more activity going on, and people who are willing to kind of step up and help make things grow and whatnot, which is always great for any organization. Okay. And I'm thinking next time I do one of these, I might have to just limit the papers I do on the actual stream and then do some of these on the side. So I'm putting more fingerprints on this paper than I realized that I would during, shuffling around and whatnot. So hopefully the paper stays pretty resilient to that. I mean, I guess it doesn't hurt. I can always... That's one nice thing with this, is if one sheet gets messed up, it's easy enough to remake one sheet of the loose leaf than it is to redo a notebook or something like that. So that'll be a nice little side perk. Get that one rinsed out. Okay, so as we move through the blues, next we've got probably Konpeki and then Amairo, I guess, would be the better order. And Konpeki, I use it quite often, and it's actually one of my small bottles that I've had for easily over 10 years. When I first got into pins around the end of 2013 era, I remember that's when they were selling these little bottles in a 3-pack. It came in like a white plastic box, and it was one of my first trips to Venice when I picked that up. Okay, so let me make sure I'm lined up here so I can get the next row down. I think my Lamy 2000 has had Konpeki in it more than any other ink. Well, the replacement one, I had to get a warranty, Lamy 2000. Since that, the new one of the Micarta has only ever had Konpeki in it. And then my stainless, it has had Shinkai in it. And I know I'm just starting this, but I already love being able to see these samples like this side by side. It's nice when you have the idea. I've seen, obviously, Lisa's swatches and whatnot, but when you're making your own version and it's actually working out as planned, that's always a nice feeling to see it come to fruition as it's happening. Okay. So one note, this Nemesine paper, because of its thickness, it's almost just too thick to see the lines through here. So hopefully that printed version from Anna, or I might have to do Sharpie lines or something on top of the lines there, just to make that a little bit easier on some of these thicker papers. Okay. Okay, so that's all of them. The dipstick. Are there any other of the Iroshizuku inks? I know you haven't seen all the ones I have, but are there any of the discontinued ones that are worth searching for, in anybody's opinion? That's one of those things I never considered in the past, that inks would be discontinued. I kind of thought, that was just my not realizing that that was a thing. Thought that there'd be enough of a market for people to continue, or these companies to continue selling the inks. I know the only ones I thought might be discontinued were like the Mont Blanc limited editions or something like that. Because I do have a couple of those that I really like the color, but I don't think I would pay the premium to track down another bottle. I would just find an alternate that would be close enough. Because I actually have two of the ones that I'll be doing today that are brand new that I have not actually even swatched yet. So I just noticed here, and I don't know if it's showing, we've had our first bleed through of something on one of these papers, so I'll have to look at that here in a moment. Got bleed through onto the template page from one of these. My guess is it's probably the plotter paper, maybe? Or maybe that Nemesine. Okay, and that's going to wrap up the Konpeki. So on to Iro. And if anybody has any questions about any of this or any inks or pens, feel free to ask. So the paper that did leak through was the Nemesine. You can see it there from the Rika because it is now on my desk a little bit. So I'm going to wipe that up real quick so it does not stay a blue mark on the top of the desk. Okay, so let me actually, with that in mind, get a sheet, and I guess this paper will always sit on there now. Really excited to see this in the actual dividers once it's in the notebook. I think that's going to be nice. Just even the empty pages, how they've been sitting in there as I punched them and got them all into the little planning project manager folders. It's a nice layout for being able to quickly find and sort these samples, because that is one thing with my... Oh, that's right. You're going to Houston and to Dromgold's and a little craft place, and wasn't there a third store possibly? I think you had mentioned that you're headed to. I always find it interesting hearing about Houston stores, having grown up there, and then realizing that little craft place is, within a few miles of where I grew up. So in another life, that would have been my local pin store. So that's always interesting to kind of, ponder on that, what that would have been like. And Dromgold's, I guess, was there, but Houston is one of those cities like Atlanta, because I think most people here have Atlanta knowledge and ties either through living there or Dragon Con, because there's a lot of crossover in these various communities. Houston is... I was 0 through 18. So I lived in Spring, which is technically a stone's throw from Conroe, or the Woodlands where they had the Craft Fest. So, yeah, I've only ever lived in Houston or Nashville. Fun fact. My whole family has since relocated, though, to northwest of Atlanta, so I no longer have any family ties aside from distant cousins and relatives, I think, like great aunts and whatnot, who are in Texas. But I think having been in Tennessee since 1998, I think I'm officially a Tennessean now, I would assume. Although I do still wear my cowboy hat when possible on Go Texan Day, because that's right around my birthday and it just seems appropriate. But driving into downtown Houston was not something you did unless you had a reason, as far out as I was. So I would have been the equivalent of being in, from the Atlanta side, probably Marietta or Kennesaw. So you'd have to do a 35-mile drive in or something along those lines. So when I was younger, I got my pin fixed through Precise V5s and different mechanical pencils that I found in the desk from my dad's engineering stuff and things like that. Well, that's one thing, Anne, that I've always found interesting is having lived in that same area for so long, it was always a thing, because coming back, I would drive back during college, and I-45 I thought would never be finished. Like, I never saw I-45 around the Conroe area, not done. It was under construction, literally, for my entire 18 years of living there, I believe, because it was such a large undertaking in that area. So I have no idea if they ever actually finished it, but it's probably one of those things by the time they finished it, they would have to start doing something again with it to, because it would have broken down or needed more work. I'll try and fix my other camera here right quick. Properties. Because the other camera does pick this stuff up a little bit better if it's going to behave. Yeah, I'm sure there's some sort of like unwritten rule of if you've lived somewhere X amount of time, you're considered native, because that's one of the rare things in Nashville. a native Nashvilleian is kind of like unheard of. There we go. So just to pop this over now that I got the other camera fixed, you can see the Rika really bled through where it wasn't really doing that on any of these other papers. So that could have been a fingerprint or something on this Clyde Nemesine. But just to show so far, you know, some of these different side by side, you know. So I've already found an error that I'm going to have to redo. Notice what I wrote there. I have Shinkai and Shinkai instead of Tsukio. So I guess one sheet I'll be redoing or just doing a scratch out line through. I was a little bit afraid of that as I was going through all these, that I was going to have some sort of screw up like that, but what you going to do? Okay, so we're on to Sui Gyoku, which this is a newer Iroshizuku to me as well, and I've written my Opus 88 Omar dry of it, and you know, I feel pretty proud to have written 2 Opus 88s dry. That's a lot of writing, but I guess that means I'm using my pens, so I've got that going for me. And if you've never seen my handwriting, for it to be as tiny as it is, that's writing 2 Opus 88 dry with extra fine nibs, which adds to that, the oddity of that. And Lisa, I know you don't know Anne, but I know Anne originally through the Battlestar stuff at Dragon Con. So there's a good chance that y'all might have run into each other in random Dragon Con passing at some point in the past as well. You know, Dragon Con people, I think we all pass by everybody waiting for an elevator or going between hotels or things like that. So crossing of the streams there into the... Because that would probably be interesting if you think about the cross section of people who go to Dragon Con who are also into pens and inks. I might actually go to panels if I was going to Dragon Con still. I would go to a pen and ink panel at Dragon Con. Yeah, my last year was 2015, I believe. I went 10 years in a row, and then there's a local guy who said something one day, and it really stuck in my head of, do I want to be the person when I'm old who went to Dragon Con every year, or the person who went every other year and then on those off years went to Europe or went to Australia or went to wherever else? And that kind of stuck with me. And while I have not been to Australia yet, you know, I did like the idea of traveling other places in addition. I love Dragon Con, but it got to the point where I still keep in touch with a lot of the people, but I didn't miss the logistics and whatnot. Yeah, and I'll be interested once you get your Jean-Claude Van, what is, it's a take on Jean-Claude Van Damme, but I can't remember exactly how you named your van for traveling. But I do expect to see some sort of like Van Damme. I do expect to see some sort of like fold-out writing desk and like a pen and ink in reserve, because that just seems appropriate. There was a video that was suggested to me on YouTube the other day, Anne, after you had been talking about your van. She's an artist who I think now lives in the UK, but is a I just blanked on the word. Oh, an expat, and she got like a little transit van, and she's an artist, so she turned the transit van into like a overnight ish ability art studio. So she can just open up the tailgate, get out her watercolor stuff and paint or something like that. So, that was interesting to see. I'll have to find that channel and send you a link, because that's a neat kind of take on that. And how's the audio coming through, by the way? I was playing with settings, and I hope the audio is coming through nice and clear. Some of these apps that you need in order to get things to play nice, you can't really see or test the levels until you go live. So just want to be sure it's actually coming through as clean as it can. Because hopefully I have the settings dialed. Okay, great. Hopefully I have the settings where now I can save them as a profile, and then I don't have to guesstimate next time. Okay, so that's Sugioku. And Lisa, I have much more appreciation now of when you're doing your streams and your ink swatching, how much more time it takes to swatch inks than you think it does. Because I can't believe I've been doing this for almost an hour already, and I've only done 7 inks. I mean, I guess that is 7 inks across multiple papers, but still, it's a lot more time intensive than you really think. Okay, so this is Shin Ryoku, so it's a greenish. I think it's like a forest green is how they describe their version of it, or something like that. Yeah, the 21 swatches, that's... The good thing is, though, once this is done, I get to a point where I've finished my current collection, adding new ones will be easier, especially if I'm doing like a new one where I only have one of the brand, because then I don't have to do as many to get caught up. It'll be a single sheet, but there's so many great inks that I'm learning about that I want to add to the collection. I'm gotta rein it in somewhat, but like I really like that the Teranishi and Tasha inks after everything I'm seeing about them, and there's a couple that almost came in my last finesse order, but they happen to be out of the bottles. So and this is just cool to see all these colors, how they're drying on these different papers. It's, you talk about it when people are asking who are new or on different streams, but having your own version, there's something to be said about that. Of, this is going to be a cool finished product when it's said and done. That makes sense, Lisa. That makes perfect sense. But your stream, and if you're not familiar, Lisa streams on Twitch. Go check out her website, oliveoctopus.ink. And she has a great Tuesday and Thursday morning stream that has a good collection of regular viewers. And there's always good conversation happening on those mornings as you're kind of a chill way to build into the workday. And then follows up by the Pen Addict Twitch streams. So definitely check that out if you're not doing that. That's a great way to see. And then on her website, she also talks about swatching tools. That's where I learned about these glass swatching rods and things like that. So wonderful resource to take advantage of. Because my original swatching was, because I really this whole YouTube thing kind of got started by doing the ink vent calendars in November and December. Originally, I was just going to do that and put it on my existing YouTube channel, but then I kind of liked it, and people were actually watching it, so I was like, huh, maybe there's something to this. So, as I've gone down the rabbit hole, it's getting me more involved in a hobby that I really enjoy, but also learning a lot of new stuff that I never really did when I first got into pins, because I didn't really have the local community to help learn it. So now I've got not just actual in-person local community, I've got virtual local community as well, which is great. Yeah, I realized that the spoke pin I ordered on the shipping stream on Tuesday is actually going to be delivered when I'm in Little Rock. So I won't get to have my new pin to play with until Sunday when I get home. But I realized I didn't have any roller balls that took a Parker refill. So, of course, the best way to remedy that is just buy a new pen that takes the Parker style refill. I got the I think it's the not the CX, but the smaller clicky version. I think it's, I don't remember the exact name. Takes the Parker style refill though, in blacked out aluminum. And that is one thing I'll show here in a second. With these plotters, which the pin loops and whatnot you can buy are great. I can't fit fountain pens in pretty much any of them. And I've actually, if you read Gentleman Stationer, and if not, definitely check out his site. He's kind of got me hooked on multi-pins. And he actually just did a post earlier today talking about the Click C, I think. It was on the stream. I literally was just looking at the website going, what could I get that takes this type of style refill? So, but I'm pretty sure it's the Click C. The all blacked out aluminum one. Because there wasn't titanium options in stock, and I didn't want to get one that matched my CX exactly, so I did get aluminum. But in terms of the multi-pins, these Lamy tri-pin are actually kind of great. So I got two of these. One I got from Vanessa, and then I went to Gentleman Station to pick up some Uni D1 refills to go in here. So because the Lamy ballpoint ink is junk, and I hate how they write. But putting in those new refills in here, and then he had just gotten some more in stock, and I knew I had the other plotter coming. So this is what I've been keeping in both of the A5 plotters, just to have a pen to write things down. And these are gravity fed, so depending on whatever color you hold up, when you click it, that's the color that'll come out. So that'll be red, and this is not going to show, it's not going to show it on there, but there's a little color ring right around the tip of the insert, so you know what color it is. So those have been great. And then, of course, I got the Uni 4-in-1 with the pure malt that has whiskey barrel, and then the Pilot 4-in-1, which the colors on the back are kind of muted, but the colors of the ink are actual true red, blue, green, and black. So the multi-pins have been a nice little foray into some other writing options. And that's one thing I've always appreciated, and you'll hear it in the interview tomorrow with Gentleman Stationer, that as much as we love fountain pens, there are other things to use besides fountain pens. You need to have a good arsenal, so to speak. So I've always appreciated that way of thinking. sometimes in hobbies, when you get people who are so into it, there can only be one way, and I think that is not accurate for most people. Having some variety and, the options to choose what works for you is a much better play. So this is an ink that I've just opened before this video. I've not actually used. And yeah, and because they're the D1 refills, they're tiny, it's slim, and it fits in the pin loop on the plotter. That's why I love it, because it actually fits in there. But this is the Chiku Ren, which I think is, the proper name is like bamboo green. So I'm not going to do it on the stream because I don't want to convolute it. I need to do this on the coloring and in my other swatch books as well. But since I've been loving that Vanessa Fresh as a Daisy from the Arkansas show so much, this is not quite as vibrant, but this is an ink I know I'm going to end up putting in a pen. I could see that, Lisa, since you like the greens, and this would be right in the correct wheelhouse of color. And, that's one of those I'd seen before, but I was like, oh, I would never write with that. I got to write with blue inks or like dark inks. And now I'm like, oh, let me put some Toro or some, write with this Fresh as a Daisy or something crazy. So definitely learning to use more inks this go round, so to speak. And it does make me a little bit sad of, there probably are some of the previous colors that you can't get anymore that would have been nice to own, but there's plenty of similar options, and having a local ink encyclopedia like Lisa Olive Octopus, who probably owns a lot of those dupes, and I can say, hey, I need something that looks like this, and then the magic swatch ring of doom comes out. That's always, a little bit spoiled in those regards, but consider that a win. Okay. So far, aside from that Rika, I think everything else, like, nothing's bled through. Of all these inks on all these papers, that's the only instance of that I believe that I have seen so far. And I've noticed those, and this might be me, but if you have the newer Iroshizuku inks, I'd love to know if you've run into this. The Cyan Gyo, the Toro, I haven't seen it, but the Cyan Gyo and the Rika, it's almost like they're a little bit of a different formula because they feather more than other Iroshizuku inks, which traditionally for me have been really consistent. Like, they don't feather, they don't really, misbehave. But in my last couple paper tests, the Cyan Gyo that I have in that Asvine with just a normal Yovo extra fine, it's been feathering on more things than I would have thought. In the Rika, on certain papers I see it, which that is somewhat to be expected, but it's not something I would have expected, honestly, from any Iroshizuku ink, because they've all been so stalwart and consistent in my use so far. So I didn't know if that was something in their new formulation, possibly, or something like that. Because, and we might see it in my bottle of Takasumi. I've had it a long time, but my friend in Memphis, that's her favorite ink. She used it for all of her doctoral stuff. Had it in like 8 pens. And when she used it, it was actually black. I think my bottle is either a bad bottle or it's just old, because it never was a good true black. So I like to tease her, and I'll send pictures of like a gray ink and be like, man, look at this Takasumi. This is great. But seeing her and her husband's writing samples of their bottle, it's like a night and day difference. So luckily though, Takasumi is one of my small bottles that I pretty much only open these days for doing some sort of swatch or comparison. My black ink of choice now is Chaokuro. Second to that would be the Edelstein Onyx, which is one of the testing inks that I have in my kind of testing pen set now. Which I do like having that testing set of pens because it makes planning for a video much easier. My wife originally had a Lockbee tool roll that she has since gone to a larger leather case. So now I literally have my testing pens in that Lockbee case with the pencils and everything, so I can just pick it up and start doing the paper writing, because I started to do a lot of that before I actually filmed the video, so that there's not a lot of dead wasted space, because I appreciate y'all being here and having conversation while doing this, but you know, writing the same lines over and over on multiple papers is pretty boring content when you're not able to have a kind of a back and forth conversation along with it, or see multiple colors. You know, lines of text definitely show different than ink swatches. Okay, so that's everything on the Shikuren. And it'll be interesting too what the this rinse water looks like at the end of all this, as we get into some of the other colors here. But so far I'm really liking how all of these are going down. It's, as they dry, the colors are going into their true form, so to speak. And okay, so I need a opinion here. Wait, did I do this? Yeah, I did that one. Should I do purple and black cherry-ish to finish out this line? Or should I do I guess I'll do the three, because then that'll finish out the line. I've got Toro, Fuyugaki, and Kosumosu, and that'll fill out that line. So I think I'm going to do those. So, okay, Toro, which is one of the other of the three newer inks, and I looked out because right when these came out, I just bought all three bottles from Gentleman Stationer, and then apparently they were sold out for quite a while, and then stores finally started getting more in. So I'm glad I got them when I did. And Pen Addict just released a write-up on his site, and I don't know if he did a video on it, but the Toro is a great orangish yellow ink, and I've had this in my Kaweco Piston Sport since I got it, and it's a great color. It's pretty vibrant. Not in my traditional wheelhouse, but I really loved writing with it. And some of the lighter inks like this, they're almost too light when you're writing, and they'll dry a little darker. And this one lays down dark enough that you can see what you're writing. Like if you've ever used the Platinum Citrus Black, it's almost like highlighter ink when you write with it, and then it, you know, oxidizes and darkens up, and then it's legible. But when you're writing with it, it's hard to see what you're doing. And, you know, originally Beth bought that for herself. She loved it, but then when she was trying to use it, she couldn't see what she was writing, so that kind of got relegated to the inks that we own, but they don't get used all that often section of the ink collection, which is sad because it is a cool ink and a cool effect. And like the lavender black from Platinum, it goes down dark enough where you can see what you're doing, so you don't have that same issue before it changes color. Man, I'm really liking this Shikuren sample. I got some pins to clean tomorrow and prep for Arkansas, and that might have to go in a pen, or if I do end up purchasing a Leonardo when I'm in Little Rock, maybe that's the ink that'll go in it. I'm really liking the look of that. Okay. So, Anne, you mentioned that you're going to Dromgool's and Little Craft Place. I believe you are picking up a plotter is on your shopping list. Any other inks or pens, or just kind of depends on what you run into when you get there. And then, Lisa, similar question to you. Do you plan on coming home with any specific inks if they have them in stock at Vanessa, or just kind of going with the flow to see if there's any in your list of want to own, haven't procured yet? And Anne, are you still thinking you're going to get the Shiranami blue? Because if so, it's so nice. The soft and the color looks better in person. Pictures do not do it justice. Ooh, 823. Would you get the amber, or would you get the smoke, or would you get the clear? Nice, nice. The amber is a wonderful brown. It it is one that does look different in pictures, but I think that's true for a lot of these pins. The colors and the vibrance, because of how the camera sensors are, they just don't come through as well as seeing them in person. But so this one's another one that's brand new. I just opened the box. It's the Fuyugaki, and I think this is going to be similar to that Sailor Tea Time that I have in my 92 right now, based off swatches and whatnot, which I've really been liking that ink, and that's what I was trying to use in the Hobonichi weeks until I ditched it to come fully to the plotter side, because it would work well enough with that paper and not show through as much. But even with it being a lighter ink, it was still showing through, unfortunately, more than was usable. So it'll be interesting to see how the plotter or the planner paper world evolves this next year. I think it was on Instagram. What's her account name? Like Hi Julia, or Julia Here, or something like that. She had a link to one of the bigger planner companies who officially announced they're ditching Sanzen for 26. They didn't publicly say what their new paper is, but they were soliciting pen and ink combos to put it through its paces. So, that was an interesting saga to follow of sorts, to see, how that will evolve into 26 and beyond. I know the original Tomoe is just not possible anymore, but will Sakai release a new paper and change the name away from Tomoe and just sunset that name so that there's not the confusion that happened? Because I think Brad is the one who said that on one of the streams, or in maybe one of the podcast episodes when he was talking to Mike about it, is if they would have released that paper and not reused the name, it would have been a complete non-issue that would have, not even probably really made a news cycle. But because they kept the name, there was an expectation, similar to the Lamy Dark Lilac, using the same name and delivering a different product the stationery community won't put up with that. That's definitely a proven thing now, that you don't want to reuse a name if it's not the exact same, be it paper, ink, just about anything at this point. But I can't blame anybody for that. You know, if you're buying something off an expectation and it's completely different, you know, that's why in all these videos of talking about papers, it's so important to New Coke. Most people now who are into the stationery community probably never heard of New Coke. But I'll never forget that, because they are the Pepsi Challenge. You know, since the New Coke era, there was the water park in Houston, Splashtown, and we'd go there in the summer, and they always had the Pepsi Challenge, where could you taste the difference between Pepsi and Coke? And maybe my taste buds are different, but that's like night and day difference. And if you got it correct, you got like a free can of Pepsi, and they didn't really police how often you came up there, so we didn't buy drinks. We would just go over, and you know, it was pretty easy to tell which was which, so you just got free drinks. Okay, so I do remember Crystal Clear Pepsi. Quite the abomination. It was terrible. But so this Fuyugaki does dry darker than my Sailor Tea Time, but I still like the color. It reminds me of the Amarillo Urn Kicks a little bit, which has become one of my quick favorite inks. Oh wow, so this plotter paper, I'm going to show this. Let me see. Let me finish writing these. The Chiku Rin, the writing on it, feathered massively, and I'm curious if that was fingerprint related or not, because this Fuyugaki and some of this whole line here, well, I guess some of the other writing on this plotter paper, when it's going down thicker from this dip pen, is also feathering somewhat, so that might just be the writing versus the paper, but I'll show that here in a second. Fuyugaki, and so we got our second example of bleed through. The Fuyugaki on this Nimacine has just about come all the way through, so it seems to have laid on extra thick there. So I'm going to switch that over to on top of this extra sheet here. Okay, those are all labeled. Let me try and get my phone camera to cooperate again. Come on. Okay, that's just not gonna... Oh, there we go. Okay, so let me switch over to that. So, which one was it that was really feathered? The plotter paper. So if you look at the text on the Chiku in there, that was quite the feather, and the Fuyugaki. So that might have been where I was holding my fingers down across the middle of the page, and actually at the angle I'm holding it now, the camera won't pick it up, but I can see where there's fingerprints on the paper, so I'm going to assume it's fingerprint related more than it is paper, but, you know, as Lisa said earlier, fingerprints happen for this type of. If I had this more, if this was spread out more, and I was on a table and not trying to shuffle all these around in limited desk space, I'm sure that these samples would come out much better, but here we are. Okay, so this is the Kosu Mosu, which is a pink ink, and I never would have guessed that I like it, but it's one of my sample testing inks now. Beth had it in her TWSBI before I bought my dedicated testing TWSBI Ecos, and I actually really like it. Let me switch the camera back over to the top view so you can see what I'm actually doing here. And pink is another color I never would have guessed that I would be, that I would own, much less like using. That's just not a color that's traditionally been in my wheelhouse. But, you know, I guess crazier things have happened. The whole cherry blossom color. Okay. And I believe the Kosumosu is one of the ones that they discontinued that I was able to pick up a remaining stock bottle, and I'm glad that I did. Beth really likes it. She's had it in a TWSBI since we got it and has refilled multiple times, and then now that I'm using it as kind of a testing ink. Now it's still going to take us a long while to get through a bottle of Iroshizuku, but that was a pleasant surprise in terms of colors. Okay. And you say Tammy Faye Baker. That makes me think of the odd, what's her name from Battlestar, Nikki Klein, where she got caught up in that whole cult thing. Since we were talking about Dragon Con earlier, that, you know, makes me think of that with the Tammy Faye reference kind of factoring in a somewhat similar-esque way. Yeah, it was just so odd. It was like, oh, okay. You know, because you don't, traditionally, I think, you know, a lot of actors or people would kind of have whatever beliefs you want to have, but they kind of kept it a little bit more subdued, and that was just an odd scenario. Like, I didn't follow it closely, but just the whole situation was peculiar. Yeah, I think there were shows and specials because there was another. I think it was an HBO. And Lisa, with you being in Nashville, I don't know if you ever heard of it. The Brentwood Church thing that, like, where there was like a plane crash or a possible murder or something. It was like a one of a religion cult, a cult that was like scamming their parishioners or something. It had like an HBO special about it. I just don't remember enough. I didn't care enough to follow it. It's not something I would normally watch, but I think we had my aunt visiting years ago, watching our dogs while we were like on a trip, and it was in the recently watched on the Netflix. So that's when, after my algorithm was completely messed up, I now have a guest profile for people to use so that, you know, my action movies are not then interspersed with reality TV or something like that. Although I will admit, we were in Jamaica one time, and some delightful British woman, I'm sure, had an interesting viewing history where she had left her Netflix signed in, and it was all these like happy family things, and then they got like all the Expendables movies, and then like Jason Bourne movies and whatnot that I put on in the background in on the trip. So I'm sure that was a nice surprise the next time they logged in of their continue watching when they got back to the UK. Okay, so it looks like there's 4 left. Get these over here without dropping them. Shuffle these over to give a little more desk room. Okay, we've got the Cyan Go. We've got the Murasashi Shikibu, which is the purple. We've got Takasumi and Fuyu Seogen. So gray, black, black cherry, and purple. So we did pink. Let's do purple next. And I did not plan this, but I have exactly 4 mixing sticks left. So I'm going to not have to wash any of them during the video. So I'm glad that worked out like it did. That's handy. Man, the Fuyugaki on, let's see if this is still, did it not update? There we go. The Fuyugaki, can't even read it. It feathered out so much. So the Chiku Rin almost looks like it was drawn as like a Godzilla. The sea kind of looks like a little Godzilla drawing or something. So that had to have been fingerprints to get that kind of effect. So, you know, with it being on the plotter paper, that's kind of a special use case of sorts because not everybody's going to have that. Now, that being said, their papers are actually quite nice. I've really enjoyed using them so far. So, if you do get a plotter, get a hole punch because you can use loose leaf, but their rip-off pads or their different papers are actually quite nice on their own. They hold up. Okay, so not getting a good. There we go. And speaking of hole punches, I'll show it here in a second. If you saw my plotter video, the hole punch that was in that video punches too deep. So I actually have a new one, and I'll probably do a follow-up once I do this and mention in the video, but I'll show it here. On Amazon, you can get the Bira, and it punches pretty much the same depth as the plotter paper. So I went through and repunched, and if you get the laconic inserts, if you run those through the same punch, it will, and actually I can show that real quick. Let me do that. Take a slight detour here. So this is the Bira, and let me switch. So, come on. There we go. So the Bira punch on the bottom, you can slide to get to the correct paper size. It'll do A4S, A5, personal, desk fax, A6, mini, and M2 pocket, which I have no idea what M2 pocket is. And then you can slide the holes to the proper size. But you can see here, so the holes are pretty deep on this laconic paper. If you put and repunch, let me slide this over so I can make sure it's actually showing in the camera. Since this is my template page, I hadn't bothered punching it. When you punch it, you can hear that it's actually doing paper. And you can see, get that below there, Oh, come on. I'm definitely going to have to get a different secondary camera for when doing these. You can see that it's a couple of millimeters over, and then the laconic pages turn beautifully in the plotter A5. So I wanted to mention that, especially Anne, knowing that you're planning on getting a plotter. Um, I'll put a link to this maybe as a YouTube post or something, but definitely get the right hole punch because that makes a huge difference in selecting your own papers to use in there. And that was thanks to Nick from our local pen club. So, Nick, if you happen to see this in the future, I had already told you, but I do appreciate that recommendation. Because one would assume a 6-hole hole punch that punches in the right space are equal, but it's equal to the point where if you're using the laconic, it's fine. If you use it in the plotter, they bind just enough to be annoying, and then you can't turn the pages, and they kind of catch up, and you have to shuffle it around, and So I went through and repunched the difference on all the laconic pages I have in my blue Shiranami that I'm using for actual, plotter type things, and I punched all the pages that are going into this plotter with the new punch so that everything turns nicely, especially when using those project manager folders. You want the holes to line up with those. So just some little tips I've learned in this short plotter journey, but I think those have been very useful in terms of making it a better, more usable experience. Okay, so got... Now this is going to be the true test of writing space because this is not the finest glass tip nib, and this is the longest name for Iroshizuku. And I think that 2-line is the way to accomplish that here. And I don't know for certain yet, but if you're around on Saturday, make sure you turn on notifications. I might do a quick stream from the Arkansas Pen Club meeting. It's going to be, I think, 1:30 p.m. Central. So maybe 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock-ish, a quick stream, not the whole thing, just to kind of show what it looks like there, because that's interesting to me to see different pen clubs and how they function. And it's at Vaness, so that's always great to be in a pen store. Look forward to seeing the Vaness crew, see Lisa, and probably go in the back and say hi to Mike, because I don't know if he's out during Pen Club or if he's probably packing and shipping orders, because if you've never ordered from Vaness, I think Mike hand writes the message on every single package that goes out. And speaking of Vaness, if you haven't been following along on some of the videos, there is a discount code that Vaness has offered me for viewers. So you can use the code DWRDNet, and it saves you 10%. And that's, that's nothing to shake a stick at. That can make a nice difference, especially since they do free shipping over a certain dollar amount. That 10% is a nice little bonus, and they don't actually give discount codes out all that often, so I'm very appreciative that they've offered that to people who follow what I'm doing. And in that same vein, that code also works with Gentleman Stationer. So, I've kind of lucked into a community where I started doing this YouTube, and stores that I appreciate and frequent believe in what I'm doing enough to offer discount codes, and those are two stores specifically that really don't hand out discount codes very often. So I'm very appreciative of that. So definitely take advantage of those if you're ordering from Vanessa or Gentleman Stationer. Save that 10%, and on your next order, and get some new pens or inks to play with. Okay, so up next is the Cyan Gyo. You say ceremonial robes. When I first got into pens, and back when Mike Vaness used to go to pen shows, he had a suit that was ink splotched. It was an ink splotched suit when he would, travel to some of the shows and be behind the table. And that was always interesting to see those photos of Mike in his ink splotched suit. I think at one point they even made like a cardboard stand-up of him. So if he wasn't at the show, there was still a Mike in his ink splotched suit there in spirit. So if you haven't used this Cyan Gyo, from the description, they don't call it black cherry, but that is the color I would consider this. It's kind of a black cherry-esque color, and I'll show an up close here before I do the writing of the names. And so on this paper, what is this? This is the Iroful. I must have had a fingerprint or something, because when doing this particular swatch, you could see it catch differently. And Iroful shows colors uniquely, but you can also see, and let me try switching over to here. That's neat. I need to contact. Would really like to do an interview with Mark from Rickshaw. I've never met him, but so far with this whole interview thing, I've been very fortunate. I've done now more interviews, I think, with people I had not met than people I have, or we're getting close to it. But I think that would be an interesting, because Rickshaw is such a beloved product by the pen and stationery world, and like in the interview with Eric from Amarillo, him doing the Amarillo Rickshaw bags and pouches is some of the best marketing he could hope for, because his color combination and logo stand out so much. It's like the best free advertising that you could hope for. And I fell into it. I've got, well, I can't get to it easily now, but I've got the 3-pin and the 1-pin now of the Amarillo. Once again, I don't know why, but bright yellow, never before. Well, I say that I do like bright yellow on some of my bags and whatnot, and actually my favorite camera bag of the past was a black bag, but the inside was bright yellow, so you could see what was in there. So if you're looking for a cable or a lens cap or something like that, you're not looking for a black cord in the bottom of a black bag. So I appreciated the yellow insides on that. But let me show this. Let's see, which one of these colors is going to... These are all still kind of drying. I guess this one is starting to... What is this? The Tomoe 52. So it's starting to show, it's more of like a burgundy black cherry than anything else. It'll show better once it fully dries, and at the end I'll try and get a good overhead shot of all these next to each other. But I've liked this ink, but like I mentioned earlier in the stream, it has feathered on more things than I would guess. And I'm just curious if that's a new formulation with the new inks. But that's just speculation. I don't use it as much in my day-to-day writing, but it has been an ink I've used in almost every paper test video. because some of the weird stuff I saw when I first got it. So it's like one of the reasons while doing this, it really showed it in my first experience to see it myself, not just on samples that Lisa showed or something like that, was the Teranishi inks on Iroful. When I first did that in the different papers and saw how it stayed this nice teal blue and never turned to green, that really hammered home the point of test on different papers, because if you have an expectation of this color, you want to be sure the color is going to show through on the paper you're using for whatever that project is. And Lisa, have you done a painting? Well, I guess the Dominant Industry paper doesn't really, show colors in a different way. But have you done a ink pony on Iroful and only used colors that don't, where it does that color shift and it locks it in on the color as you're laying it down, where it doesn't get to change? That might be an interesting pony to do on a stream someday. Do it on Iroful and only use inks that do the weird color shift on Iroful, just to kind of illustrate that. Okay, so so the Dominant Industry does do the color shows very similar. Okay, I didn't realize that, but then I guess there's not all that many inks that do that same kind of effect. Okay, so I guess I will go black and then gray, since that dark cherry, or the Sangyo, which is like more of a black cherry. And actually, I'm going to shake this bottle up first, because as I mentioned earlier, my Takasumi is not very black. It shows up more gray in the recent times I've used it. So give that a good shake. And let's see. So maybe that's what was missing last time I tried to swatch this, was giving it a good shake, because it had sat a while. Because this is going down black. I guess we'll see what it dries to see if it dries black or if it dries more on the gray side. Because I know there's been a ton of videos out there about the blackest black inks and how inks, show black, and I'm sure at some point I'll do my version of it, but I think we all kind of know that if you want the blackest ink, you get Chaokuro, but if you don't want pigmented, then you would go for a different thing. And I actually have here, that I've not yet opened, is the Diatramentis Document Black. So that'll be interesting to play with. Another ink that I have that I have not yet opened, that came in my order the other day, is the Coffee Monsters Co. And look forward to using that, because it's a brownish. And now that I'm looking at that, I realized I hadn't switched back over. So let me switch back to this so you can actually see what I'm doing with the black swatch here. So some gray blacks go indigo on the Iroful B7. Interesting. Now, the B7 paper, Lisa, did you ever actually find a true source for that same stuff, or is that still part of your... Are you on the hunt for the actual... that B7 paper by its own, or by itself? Okay, we got all the papers colored. And I never realized when doing these streams how much of a delay there is. I have a TV in my office and it's to the side, and I guess YouTube builds in a decent delay of when I say something versus when you hear it or see it. Okay, so Jet Pens has the B7. That is one thing I plan to see this weekend, what Vanessa has in terms of loose leaf papers. Loose leaf is not something that I'd really ever purchased much of, because I think of it more for like letter writing and whatnot, but I've used some of my Yu-Sari loose leaf for letter writing. I have an MD pad that I've used, and I did just get the Tasha sets that, and Anne, I don't know if you've received my latest letter, but it was one of the first two on the Tasha set, yours, and I know Chris is already off for the evening. But you two got my first two of the Tasha sets. Yeah, I don't remember the church. I remember it was in Brentwood that had that whole weird thing, and I think it's an HBO docu-series about it. Because I think that church still exists. I'll be interested to see when that arrives, and I sent it on Saturday. So depending on how long, and I dropped it off at the post office in one of the blue boxes. So that'll be interesting to see how long that takes to get there. But if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of the stationery packs, well, that's blotter paper. So let's see. Like, it's these cool designs. This one's the Hokusai letter set, and it's got matching envelopes with designs, and it's pretty cool. You get 8 sheets of paper and 4 envelopes, so that's also kind of nice because 2 sheets of A5, at least with my writing, that's a pretty decent letter, and it's pretty thick ruling. But neat little thing, now that I've kind of gotten into some letter writing thanks to the Gentleman Stationer Discord, which, if you're not a patron of Joe, check that out. That Discord is really growing up and turning into a nice little community that can actually interact with, because that's one thing with Patreon is you never really knew who the other people are. And now that there's the Discord, we're able to put faces with, or not faces, but names with commonalities of, I think most of the people who've been on here at least a little bit have been in that Discord, and then you can see, Anne is in this Discord, well, she's also in this, or Chris is in this Discord, he's also in this. So you kind of get that crossover community vibe, which is nice as well, especially if you're going to be planning on going to a pen show or something. If you see in a thread, hey, I'm going, you can at least have, you might not have met in person, but my experiences with these niche hobbies, most of the people, you spend more time with them online, so you probably know them better than people you know in person, realistically. Hello, Suzanne. welcome. So I have family in Atlanta. Are you in Atlanta proper? Because my family is northwest in the Dallas, Georgia, Kennesaw area. And we had someone else on here earlier who's in Atlanta, greater Atlanta area person as well. Decatur, okay. Well, welcome. Just working on these various ink swatching pages here, and I realized I'm on the wrong camera still. Get to the one that's overhead. We're on the last ink of the Iroshizukus that I currently own, setting up this swatching book that's going to go in the A5 plotter. So I have multiple papers. Well, plotter, it's really just going to be the notebook for the... Only one of these is actually plotter paper. The rest of these are just punched A5. I'm still new to plotter, but I have 3 of them now, so I think I would qualify as liking them. I have 2 A5s, and I'll show it again here at the end because I showed it right at the beginning. With the green horsehair A5 is what these are going to go in, and it's going to be a dedicated paper / ink swatching notebook. And then I have the blue A5 Shiranami, which has become my go-to thing. I'm putting work planning in, YouTube video planning, scheduling the interviews for the interview part of the channel. And then I have a Bible size that I carry around with me, and I double enter stuff from that into the plotter. So I tried a Hobonichi Weeks for the first time this year, and unfortunately I got one of the ones with the questionable paper that had the bad show through, bleed through, pretty much not usable because you couldn't use both sides of the paper. So I lost that first time lottery on there. I'm willing to explore it in the future, but I'm going to let other people start out and be the guinea pigs on that. I didn't know better this time. Thank you. These are all the Iroshizuku inks, and I'm going to have to do multiple streams to kind of go through. I was just starting with one brand because each of these pages, my goal is to have the different papers from the different brands. And I don't have the weeks handy. It's a little bit, I've moved it away since it's not part of the normal rotation now, but you know, now that I've started using more multi-pens, I might have been able to get away with using it more, but I actually was a Filofax user many years ago, and I went back to that, but my 20-year-old binder was starting to flake the lining out, and I went to that Bible size and realized that I guess I was always a ring-bound person and just didn't realize it. Liked returning to it, and the Bible size is slightly smaller than the other cover, so I'm able to carry it around in my pocket easier. So I've returned to that system. Yeah, I had a Filofax, and I actually have the cover here. I can grab it in a second. It's down beside of me. It's what I'm putting my pages as I take them out of the Bible size in. I worked at a bookstore here in Nashville that no longer exists. It was a huge independent, rest in peace, Davis Kid Booksellers. And we sold Filofax. And I had, when it was on clearance, a black Filofax Personal. But I think the technical name of it at the time was the Executive. And I carried it for years in my pocket. I used it as a somewhat wallet-ish, but it was kind of big for that. But back when I still carried a checkbook and all that kind of stuff, that was what I had. And I normally had a bag with me, so it was always in the bag. And I would use it in the bookstore for writing down, okay, I need to go restock this book on this shelf, for things like that. Between that and Moleskine, I was a voracious Moleskine pocket user because I was pre my fountain pen days. And I own somewhere that I've been looking for in my house and I've not found I had a Lamy ballpoint from back then. Which pens? Fountain pens, Suzanne? If so, then yes. There's a lot of letter writing communities that have popped up through different online things like Discords or whatnot. And we were just talking about that. I just showed, and I can grab it here again, some new stationery I got from Vanessa out of Little Rock that I've been using for some of the correspondence. Anne, who's in the chat, is going to be one of the first recipients of one of the new Tasha letter sets. Okay, so that is all of them. So let me put this over in here. Get this closed up, and I can grab a couple of those things I've been talking about here. And I'll try and find a link. I can put it after, or maybe Lisa, you might know. I think all the hobbies Kim posted in one of the Discords the other day, maybe the Gentleman Stationer one. There's a letter writing community. I think it's through an Instagram account. That's kind of a good way to connect with other people if you're looking to find pen pals. I'm more than willing to be a pen pal as well. If so, you can. My email for the channels on my YouTube. You can send me an email, so I'm not having to post my address out. But I'm more than willing to give you an address if you want to send a letter, and I would be glad to send one back. It might be on stationery like this. Switch over to this camera; it shows it better. This is the Tasha Hokusai letter set, where you get the cool back there, and it's 2 sheets of lined paper. Well, it's 8 sheets of paper total, and you get 4 envelopes. And I'm excited. I actually finally ordered some good stamps. My stamps that I've had are, actually, they're right here. They are 37-cent stamps that I've had for probably 20 years. And so I've actually ordered some proper new stamps. I got the D&D set, the Sea Turtle set, and 2 others that I don't remember off the top of my head. But I'm looking forward to having some proper ink. And then this is the other of the Tasha sets that I got from Vanessa. And I really like this. And if you have their inks, this kind of matches their ink box. Yeah, there's a Dungeons & Dragons stamp set. If you go on the USPS website right now, it's a sheet of Dungeons & Dragons themed stamps. And someone posted that in, I think it was the Gentleman Station or Patron Discord the other day. I saw that, and I was like, okay. I dabbled in D&D. I was never a hardcore player, but that's too good to not pick up. Especially for writing to people I know who play, like, you know, I'm pretty sure Anne is, I know she's at least a tabletop gamer, maybe D&D, maybe other systems, but, you know, writing to people who I know appreciate it, that's always nice to add that in. So let me grab some of these things here. Okay, so while these are drying, let me get that kind of set over there. Okay, switch back to the top over camera. So, plotters. This is the A5 Shiranami. And I can walk through here. And here I have the zippered pouch, which goes front and back. And I apologize, this camera is a little bit blurry. But, you know, that's probably good, so you're not seeing the writing of stuff necessarily. So I've got the page divider, and these are the laconic. And let me, I can show this easy enough over here. Come on, camera. Right when I'm trying to use it, the other camera decides to give me a second. Properties. I'm getting really good at fixing this because that's like the 3rd or 4th time that it has decided to bump out when I want to use it. Okay, so I just released a video on the laconic inserts, and they're less expensive. Kind of if you're not fully committed to the plotter and you don't know if you want to fork out the money, the laconic system has actually been pretty great, and their inserts are undated. So I have monthly in there, and then following the monthly, I have, in terms of this, I only have a couple of months in here because with the rings being small, I want to have this timely, but not the entire year. I have the entire year in my Bible size by week. So if I need to put something longer term, I can do that. And then part of my weekend routine now is to kind of go through. But as you can see on this, on the week pages, it's undated. So you can, seriously, that's annoying. Let me just do this. So on the week pages, you can do that. Let's see if the other camera is going to cooperate now. I heard it chime. There we go. So I got week pages. And then after that, I've got just some extra paper. And I guess if I hold it over this way, I can get that camera to show it. That's a list of future interview things for the channel. These are some of the laconic graph papers. I have a few of these project manager folders, and this is what, when I open the other one, you'll see that going in there. But these project manager folders, these are some extra sheets that a local friend gave me of different plotter papers to kind of try before I ordered stuff. I really like this one, but I don't know what I'd use it for. It's their art paper, which, if you notice, it's a little bit wider, but it's perforated, so you can rip out the perforations if you need to. And then these are some of their, I think, spreadsheet pages or something like that is what they call them. But that's neat to have, you know, grateful to get a couple of sample pages before committing. And then the pin loop riser board. And in this, I was showing earlier, I actually have a multi-pin. This is a Lamy multi-pin, and I hate Lamy ballpoint, so I've changed out all the inserts on these to Uniball. So I've got the good low viscosity Japanese inks. Yeah, it's an art paper. It was a stiffer, like I think it's considered the plotter drawing paper, possibly. But yeah, this has been great. I actually have these for both of the A5 plotters because they fit in the pin loop. I would put one of my fountain pens in there or something else, but I really like Joe from Gentleman Stationer's theory on multi-pins and, you know, use the right tool. And because that fits in there, and I do like to color code things, you know, this can easily, the band can go around. And I can already tell this Shiranami cover, you know, I haven't had it all that long because this is the replacement after the first one I got had a ring issue. This is going to age and patina beautifully. I mean, the color, it looks so different in person. The camera doesn't really pick it up. And then this is what all these pages will go in once they're dry. This is the A5 horsehair. And in here, I have the... Let me just do this. Let me move this over here so it can dry. I can just show on this camera a little better. Slide those out of the way a little bit. So in here, I have the project manager folder, and this is some of my other paper tests. Got the Maruman, the laconic paper, some of the plotter paper where I was just doing initial writing and bleed through tests with various pens. And then in these, this is the Yamamoto, the two of the paper tasting packs that I've done so far. I've got the different A6, B7, A6, and B7 sheets of both of those packs. I was just able to punch them. And then this is all Tomoe 52 gram. This is all Iroful. This is all Yu-Sari. This is Life Bank paper. These are two of the Yamamoto A5 paper testing packs that I've done. And these are the folders that all this will go in. And then back here I have some sheets of plotter paper and then punched sheets of the Maruman Nimacine Clyde edition. So that all of that is going to be in here once it's dried. I want to make sure it's fully dried before I put it into the folders. But no, I'm looking forward to that. And, you know, this is one thing I love just watching the chat as I'm kind of talking through this. Board game people and tabletop game people, they instantly have a bond because they all have a list of like 50 games that they've played or they want to play, and they buy them and then they don't get a chance to play them. Because I have some local friends who I went to college with, and they have a wall of games. And every time we go over there, it's like, hey, let's learn this new game. And by the time you've learned what the game's about, it's like, okay, let's play one of the games we played last time. Because it's, there's so many games. I think, because wasn't Gen Con this last weekend? My friend Danielle, she actually was doing presentations. She's a teacher, and she started D&D clubs for her school, and she's been working with Wizards of the Coast to do presentations on some of the like she did presentations at Gen Con for Wizards of the Coast about teachers starting clubs and whatnot. So that's pretty neat. And then the other plotter, I've moved stuff around so it wasn't in the way when I was recording. This is the Bible-sized plotter. It's in the black horsehair. And this currently has just some scratch pages in the front. I've got my packing list for my trip this weekend. And then I use the week and 2 pages format. And I like to have extra scratch paper. That is one thing. Okay, so then she's going to be presenting at Gen Con. So she must have just been posting that it's coming up. So she'll be at Gen Con for that. But I actually add a sheet of plotter paper into the middle of the week across 2 pages because I like to have extra scratch. So Suzanne, with you being in the Atlanta area, if Gen Con is too many people, I assume then you have not ventured into the world of Dragon Con, because Gen Con is a smaller populace than Dragon Con by far, but Dragon Con, there's so much more happening there depending on when you're going. Oh, so then if you've been once, you understand the gravity, because I think a lot of people who are at least on this at the moment or have been on this chat are familiar with Dragon Con or have been there. I was a 10-year in a row attendee, and I actually shot on their staff photographer for a couple of years. So very familiar with Dragon Con. I miss the people, but I don't miss the craziness and the volume of people. So I think I'm about ready to wrap this up. I appreciate everybody kind of following along. I'm going to do some more of these in the future after this weekend of going to the Arkansas Pen Show and things like that. Let me switch my camera over to... Is this the one? There we go. So yeah, after this weekend, I'm going to go through and do other series of inks on this. I'm going to try and limit it probably to a brand at a time so I can do the similar pages and link them up. So I have my Edelsteins, my Diamines. Probably won't do all the Inkvent inks. I'm probably going to do non-Inkvent calendar inks, unless like in the Colorverse, the ones that they are releasing in full bottles, I'll probably do those. But trying to leave Inkvent as kind of its own category for that. But no, I appreciate you following along, or if you're watching this on the recording, some of the things we talked about, don't forget through both gentlemanstationer.com or Vanessa1938.com. You can use DWRDnet and save 10%. Very appreciative to both Vanessa and Gentleman Stationer for offering that to people who follow along the videos and things that I'm doing. I also did want to mention I've started to do some writing on my website that kind of goes along with the videos, that fills in some of the blanks. So if you look on dwrd.net, you can follow along with that. I have an RSS feed there, which is a nice way to get some of those updates as I do videos. Tomorrow morning, the interview with Joe from Gentleman Stationer will be releasing on the DWRD.net video podcast feed, or audio versions are available on Apple or Spotify. So other than that, appreciate everybody following along, and enjoy your trip to Drum Ghouls and Little Craft Place. We expect to hear a full experience on that, because those look like cool little stores, and we'll post some stuff from Little Rock. And don't forget, also in the morning, Lisa Olive Octopus is in the chat. She does her Twitch stream from 7:30-ish up until around 9. That's always a great way to have a chill start to your morning, see some ink swatching, see some pens, good conversation always happening in the chat there. That's twitch.tv/oliveoctopusink. So until next time, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next time we do a video. Thanks.